Hi guys, my name is Siobhan Fallon. Welcome back. Today we'll revisit the dark aftermath of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. In episode 1 and 2, we focused on the officers and enlisted men of the 7th Cavalry who survived the fight but suffered severe trauma from that bloody day, June 25th, 1876. Today we're going to take a look at the other side, the side that won, that of the warrior Crazy Horse of the Oglala Sioux and Chief Sitting Bull of the Hunkpapa Sioux. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was a tremendous victory for them and their people, but they would soon be facing tragedy of their own. Both men were respected leaders who had been in active resistance to the United States Army for most of their lives. They were powerful, which of course made them a threat to white leadership, but it also made them a threat to leadership amongst their own people. And they'd soon find themselves in the center of political unrest and betrayal. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Too often, historical accounts of the Battle of the Little Bighorn start with June 25th, 1876, but there were countless moments that led up to that fight, and here are a few. Gold had been discovered in the Black Hills during the 7th Cavalry's expedition there in 1874. The Black Hills were part of the Great Sioux Reservation, and the Lakota considered this land, which they called Pahasapa, to be sacred, just as other tribes who had lived on it for centuries had also thought it was sacred. But miners, eager for gold, were not above trespassing, however sacrilegious it might be. And the economically challenged United States government was determined to purchase this land. The Sioux, however, would not sell. Then in late 1875, President Ulysses Grant decreed that all the roaming tribes must return to their reservations by January 1876, and those who did not would be deemed hostile. Certain groups of the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne, including those who followed Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, had no plan to follow this injunction, so the United States Army was sent to make them do so. This campaign, often called the Centennial Campaign as it fell during the 100th anniversary of the United States of America, was meant to be a 3-part effort with 3 columns coming from roughly different directions. The Dakota column was personally led by General Alfred Terry and included Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry. The Montana column with Colonel John Gibbon and elements of the 7th Infantry and the 2nd Cavalry, as well as the Wyoming column under Brigadier General George Crook, with elements of the 2nd and 3rd Cavalry and the 4th Infantry, and fortunately for Crook, there were also a huge contingent of Crow and Shoshone Indian Scouts. The first skirmish occurred on March 17th, 1876, when part of Crook's column, led by Colonel Joseph Reynolds, attacked a Cheyenne village. This was not a win for the U.S. Army. Reynolds would be court-martialed over it, and the Northern Cheyenne, made destitute by the attack, joined the bands of the Oglala Sioux, led by Crazy Horse. The Oglala then brought the Cheyenne to Sitting Bull's Hunkpapa camp, who welcomed them with open arms and gave them supplies and weapons. The Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg said, "I can never forget the generosity of Sitting Bull's Hunkpapa that day." Then these tribes began traveling together, helping to create the large unification we'll see in June 1876. Please see my video on the Powder River fight for more detail on this. On June 17th, 1,200 warriors, combined Cheyenne and Lakota, attacked Crook's army on the Rosebud. The warriors crippled Crook's column to such a degree that he retreated back to his base camp on Goose Creek and effectively took his 1,500 men, infantry, cavalry, you name it, out of the early part of the summer campaign entirely. And Crook did not get word to his higher command, certainly not to General Terry or to Lieutenant Colonel Custer, that he did not let them know that his column was out of commission or that the Lakota and Cheyenne were united and strong, and rather than being in the mood to retreat, they were on the offensive. On June 25, 1876, thinking the 7th Cavalry had been spotted and that the tribes would flee, George Custer divided his command into 3 columns. Captain Frederick Benteen and 3 companies were first sent on a scout to the left to drive everything before him. A few miles later, Custer told Major Marcus Reno and 3 companies, with the allied Crow and Arikara Indian scouts, to charge the village below and bring the Indians there to battle. Then Custer, without explaining to Reno, made a very Custer decision and moved up around the bluffs to attack the villages in a cavalry pincher move. Meanwhile, the pack train with its security detail followed at a slower pace from behind the other 3 columns. Reno rode into the valley. The first camp circle was that of the Hunkpapa Sioux, who were the people of Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull was often seen as a unifier and the old man chief, or highest spiritual leader amongst the gathered tribes. Reno charged, but then threw down a skirmish line, which soon pulled back into a wooded timber. Not long after, Reno feared the warriors were infiltrating this timber, and he ordered a retreat. This movement was rather unorganized and strung out. Reno and his men fled across the river and up the bluffs, where Captain Benteen's column, returning from his scout to the left, soon met them. Meanwhile, Custer and his 5 companies continued their own trajectory, moving farther away from Reno, Benteen, and the pack train with the additional ammunition. Custer sent a message to Benteen ordering him to come quick. With these forces, that's a total of 7/12 of the 7th Cavalry, never made it out to Custer. Custer and everyone in his immediate command was wiped out. Now let's take a look at 2 men who led their people to victory that day, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. This is going to be just a quick synopsis, guys. I know there's just too much to cover in one episode, but like all things, and we're going to talk about it, nothing is black and white. There are some surprises about these men's lives, and even more so about their deaths. Crazy Horse, or Tushunka Witko, was an Oglala Lakota believed to be born in 1841. He was a young teenager during the Grattan Massacre of 1854, in which 30 U.S. soldiers were killed over a cow. His village was later attacked in retaliation for this Grattan Massacre, and 86 Oglala men, women, and children were killed. Not long after, Crazy Horse had a vision of a man on horseback, his hair loose, a lightning bolt on his face, and his body painted with hailstones. He told Crazy Horse not to wear a war bonnet and to never take trophies in battle. He also instructed Crazy Horse to toss dust over his horse and to place a stone behind his ear before every fight. And he prophesied that Crazy Horse's death would not come from an enemy bullet. In 1866, part of Red Cloud's war, Crazy Horse is credited for acting as a member of the decoy party that drew Captain Fetterman and his troops beyond the support of Fort Kearny. Captain Fetterman followed what he believed to be just a handful of warriors, only to find himself and his men surrounded by 1,000 Lakota and Cheyenne. All 80 men with Fetterman were killed. The Oglala tribe split in 1868, half going to live on the Red Cloud Agency in Nebraska, while the other half remained in active resistance to whites. Crazy Horse chose the warpath over agency life. There are no known photos of Crazy Horse, but here's a description by a niece of the Brule chief Swift Bear, Susan Bordeaux. She said Crazy Horse was a very handsome man. He was not so dark. He had hazel eyes, nice, light, long brown hair. His braids were wrapped in fur. He was only partly wrapped in a broadcloth blanket. His leggings were also navy blue broadcloth. His moccasins were beaded. He was above medium height and very slender. There are many mentions of his having fair hair and skin, which have led some to believe that Crazy Horse may have had some white ancestry. Crazy Horse's good looks also got him into trouble. His friend No Water caught Crazy Horse with his wife and shot the warrior in the face. Crazy Horse survived but lost his prestige as a shirt wearer because of this incident. The woman returned to her husband, but the scorned No Water would later play a role in Crazy Horse's demise. On June 17, 1876, along with more than 1,200 warriors, Crazy Horse helped defeat General George Crook at the Battle of the Rosebud. And of course, 8 days later, he helped defeat the 7th Cavalry at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. When Major Marcus Reno and the 7th Cavalry first attacked the villages on the Little Bighorn River, Crazy Horse was careful to prepare for war in the way his early vision had instructed him, so much so that his warriors grew impatient. He painted hailstones on himself and his horse, as well as a lightning bolt on his face, which always kind of makes me wonder if he was the inspiration behind J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter lightning scar. Red Feather, the brother of Crazy Horse's wife, Black Shawl Woman, described the 7th Cavalry and Reno's column first attacking the Hunkpapa or Sitting Bull's camp and then retreating to the timber when Lakota warriors came out to meet them. Red Feather said, "There was dust around the woods. Some Indians shouted, 'Give way, let the soldiers out. We can't get at them in there.' Soon the soldiers came out and tried to go to the river. When they came out of the woods, they were excited and scattered. The Indians mixed with them. Just then, Crazy Horse came." Black Elk, also of the Oglala band, witnessed Reno's column's retreat. He said, "A great cry went up in the dust. 'Crazy Horse is coming!' Off toward the north, they were yelling, 'Hoka-hey!' like a big wind roaring and making the tremolo, and you could hear eagle whistles screaming." It may have been Crazy Horse and his warriors attacking the end of the 7th Cavalry retreat that led to such chaos and casualties of the soldiers there. And that wasn't the only part of the battlefield where Crazy Horse had a profound effect on the fight. Crazy Horse is believed to have also gone to the east side of Custer Ridge near Irishman Captain Miles Keogh's location. Crazy Horse's bravery run split the U.S. troops into 2 bunches, leading up to the collapse of Keogh's defense. You'll remember that Crazy Horse's vision said he could not be killed by a bullet? Well, he tested that theory. His friend Red Feather said, "Crazy Horse came up on horseback with an eagle horn, and he rode between the 2 parties. The soldiers all fired at once, but didn't hit him." Waterman, one of only 5 Arapaho warriors who fought that day, said Crazy Horse was the bravest man I ever saw. He rode closest to the soldiers, yelling to his warriors. All the soldiers were shooting at him, but he was never hit. Following the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the bands of Lakota and Cheyenne packed up their villages and dispersed. General Terry, with Colonel Gibbon's column, watched them leave in the distance and decided not to pursue them. Now, the Army had been trying to downsize. The 7th Cavalry at the Little Bighorn was severely undermanned, but being bested by the roaming Lakota and Cheyenne again and again during this very publicized campaign, from more than one of Crook's fights, which led to multiple court-martials, to Gibbon's column seemingly avoiding conflict with the roving bands, to the decimation of Custer's immediate command and very nearly the whole 7th Cavalry, it was not a good look for the Grant administration. The United States Congress, after years of not giving the U.S. Army what they needed and begged for, was suddenly in the mood to be more generous. Army ranks swelled. Meanwhile, George Crook's column was finally back in pursuit, as well as the 7th with their new recruits. They once more tried to drive the Lakota back to the Great Sioux Reservation. Crazy Horse and his people were found camped on the Tongue River in Montana Territory. He attacked Colonel Nelson Miles' forces on January 8, 1877, but was defeated. Crazy Horse's people were starving, his wife was ill, and Crazy Horse himself was tired of fighting. On May 7, 1877, Crazy Horse led 1,100 followers into Camp Robinson to surrender. It was in May 1877 that Crazy Horse served as a first sergeant with the United States Indian Scouts for 3 months. Meanwhile, the Oglala community was rife with factions. Leaders and even friends of Crazy Horse conspired against him, stoking the fear of the U.S. military that Crazy Horse was preparing to fight them again. Oglala chiefs Red Cloud and Spotted Tail, who were also first sergeants in the U.S. Indian Scouts, as well as Chief American Horse, feared Crazy Horse's popularity would supplant their own power. No Water, the man who had shot Crazy Horse in the face in 1870 over his wife, had since become a chief in his own right and was actively working with Captain William Philo Clark to capture Crazy Horse. The U.S. Army certainly did not need much of an excuse to arrest one of their greatest foes. When an Oglala Indian scout fed false information about Crazy Horse wanting to kill General Crook, Crazy Horse was put under arrest. It was a tense situation, with many Oglala gathering to watch. Crazy Horse thought he was going to have a chance to speak with the U.S. military leadership and defend his position, but when he realized he was going to be locked in the guardhouse, he reached for his knife and tried to escape. His friend, Little Big Man, grabbed Crazy Horse's arms to hold him back, and Crazy Horse slashed at him, wounding Little Big Man's wrists. In the confusion, the warrior and longtime friend of Crazy Horse, He Dog, said that Chief Red Cloud was shouting, "Shoot to kill!" But it was a U.S. guard with a bayonet who dealt Crazy Horse the death blow, running him through. Crazy Horse died that night. In an incredible overlap of history, the wounded Crazy Horse was placed in the adjutant's office, and the adjutant was Lieutenant Fred Calhoun, who was the brother of Lieutenant James Calhoun, who died with Custer at the Little Bighorn. One of the last things Crazy Horse did was speak to Lieutenant Jesse M. Lee, the acting Indian agent, who had promised Crazy Horse that he would not be hurt if he turned himself in. This, too, is an overlap of history. You might remember that Lieutenant Lee was the recorder, acting as a sort of prosecutor at the Reno Court of Inquiry in Chicago in 1879. On his deathbed, Crazy Horse said to Lieutenant Lee, "My friend, I don't blame you for this." Lee was still haunted by Crazy Horse's death, writing in his private diary, "My part in this transaction is to me a source of torture." Crazy Horse's mother and father were with him when he died. There are different accounts of his last moments. Some say he sang his death song. Others say he said, "A good day to fight, a good day to die, brave hearts." His parents prepared the body, and when they left the reservation, they took the body with them to the Spotted Tail Agency. His body was later moved, and his final resting place remains a mystery. There also remained bitter feelings between the followers of Chief Red Cloud and those of Crazy Horse for years. Sitting Bull Tatanka Ayatanka was born into the Hunkpapa band around 1831. He played many roles, from warrior, holy man, political leader, to unifier of the Plains tribes. He had been at the forefront of resistance against white encroachment on native lands. When representatives of his tribe, including the warrior Gall, signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, Sitting Bull refused to uphold the treaty or, quote, "sell any of my country." Instead, his band of Hunkpapa remained on the warpath, attacking U.S. military forts, migrating settlers, surveying parties, and the railroads. Sitting Bull gained notoriety in the newspapers across America for his continued warlike stance, and he was there during the multiple fights between the 7th Cavalry and the Lakota during the Yellowstone Campaign of 1873. The 7th Cavalry, under Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, were sent on an expedition to the Black Hills, known as Pahasapa to the Lakota. When gold was found and the Grand Administration tried to buy the Black Hills, Sitting Bull responded, "Friends, what are you talking about? The Black Hills belong to me." Though we think of Sitting Bull mostly as a holy man, there exists Smithsonian ledger art copied from Sitting Bull's own drawings of his many warrior exploits. I'm going to put the link in the description box, so take a look at that later, guys. So here you see the buffalo symbol, that's Sitting Bull's symbol of himself. And here are just a small sampling of his warrior deeds, and they're pretty violent. In March of 1876, 1/7th Cavalry soldier, Corporal Thomas Egan, wrote to his sister just before he departed on the campaign, "I think we will have some hard times this summer. The old chief Sitting Bull says he will not make peace with the whites as long as he has a man to fight." That young man, Egan, did not survive the Little Bighorn campaign. June 14, 1876, Sitting Bull participated in the holy ceremony called the Sun Dance. He sacrificed 50 small pieces of skin from each arm before dancing for hours while looking at the sun. He then had his famous vision that his people would be attacked by soldiers, but the soldiers would find death. He saw the soldiers hurtling from the sky into the villages upside down. He knew his people would win, and news of this vision filled the gathered tribes with confidence. Sitting Bull was still recovering from the Sundance during the Rosebud fight of June 17th, and he did not himself go to fight. Everyone assumed this victory against General Crook's column fulfilled the prophecy. But the greater victory was, of course, against Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Sitting Bull was in the Hunkpapa village when Reno and his men attacked. In late November 1877, Sitting Bull granted 2 newspaper interviews. While speaking to these journalists, he distinguished between Reno's first attack in the valley and Custer's fight on the other side of the village complex. Sitting Bull said that he was in his lodge when young men ran in and told him that they were under attack. He said that the old men, women, and children were then sent to the other ends of the camps while his warriors fought Reno in the timber. Sitting Bull, his arms still weak from the Sundance ceremony, sent his nephew One Bull to fight in his stead, giving him his shield and bow and arrows. He urged the warriors to brave up. It will be a hard time. Brave up. Supposedly, in the chaos of the surprise attack, one of Sitting Bull's wives only grabbed one of her infant son twins when she fled. She later returned to her lodge for the other baby. Sitting Bull said that Major Reno's men retreated to the bluffs. When asked if those men posed a threat after their retreat, Sitting Bull said Reno's men posed no threat, that the Indian women could deal with them, and that there were none but women and children in front of them that afternoon. However, the Custer sector was the, quote, big fight, and all the fighting men of all the Indian camps ran to the place where the big fight was going on. Sitting Bull said that at first the Braves attacked Custer head on, but then they realized it'd be better to surround Custer. He said that he had 5 times as many Braves that Custer had soldiers. He also said, "It was Custer's fault. Why did he take them into such a place? He was too brave. It is better to be afraid than too brave like Custer." He also said, "These men who came with the long hair were as good men as ever fought." But of the soldiers on Reno Benteen Hill, Sitting Bull said, "There was no need to waste warriors in that direction. We knew they wouldn't dare come out." He claimed that the sound of Custer's fight could be heard as far away as where the women were gathered down in the valley. Quote, that the guns could have been heard 3 miles and more. After the fight, Sitting Bull said, "My heart is full of sorrow that so many were killed on each side." He told the tribes not to take anything from the bodies of the soldiers. This did not stop the stripping and mutilation of the dead that occurred. 2 days after the fight, realizing that Terry's command was approaching, the tribes all departed, eventually going their separate ways. In the fall of 1876, Colonel Nelson Miles found Sitting Bull and his camp at the mouth of the Tongue River. Sitting Bull sent him a note by a mixed-race fellow in his band who wrote English. The note said, "I want to know what you are doing traveling this road. You scare all the buffalo away. I want to hunt in this place. I want you to turn back. If you don't, I will fight you." Miles asked to meet with Sitting Bull in person. Miles described him as, quote, "a strong, sturdy-looking man of about 5 feet 11 inches in height, with strongly marked features, high cheekbones, a strong underjaw indicating determination and force. He was a man of few words and cautious in his expressions, evidently thinking twice before speaking." Once more, Sitting Bull refused to surrender, telling Miles that his God made him an Indian and did not make him an agency Indian, and he did not intend to be one. Sitting Bull escaped capture that day, but the United States Army did not stop harassing him. He and his followers crossed into Canada, which they called the Grandmother's Land, since it was ruled by Queen Victoria. Sitting Bull was met by James Morrow Walsh, head of the Northwest Mounted Police, and the two came to respect each other, with Walsh often advocating for Sitting Bull. The interviews I mentioned earlier took place in Canada, with Sitting Bull speaking good French to one of the journalists. Sitting Bull requested land in America for all the tribes, where they could hunt and fish and live alongside each other in peace. For the white Indian agent, he said, "My people want a Catholic missionary. They are good men. They are the best servants of the Great Spirit. They know our people well." But it was finally hunger that forced Sitting Bull to return to the United States after 4 years in Canada. Families of some of his head men had already left, including Gall, Rain in the Face, Crow King, Low Dog, as well as some of Sitting Bull's own family. In July 1881, he gave his war bonnet to Major Walsh, said he was, quote, "through with fighting," and then he crossed over and surrendered at Fort Buford, Montana. He was held prisoner at Fort Randall for about a year and a half, and then he and his people were finally integrated into the Standing Rock Agency. In 1885, Sitting Bull spent 4 months touring the Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He was a huge draw to audiences. He was delighted with the sharpshooter Annie Oakley, calling her Little Sure Shot. Sitting Bull made $50 a week, about the equivalent of $1,700 a week, with a bonus of $125, and he could sell his autograph photos for $1.50 each. Considering an enlisted man in the United States Army was only making $15 a month, this was pretty good pay. But Sitting Bull was famous for giving his money away to those he thought were in more need than he. After his tour with the Wild West show, Sitting Bull returned home to Standing Rock and his family and was determined to stay there. After watching the buffalo nearly die out, years of the United States government supplying dwindling rations, hunger, sickness, and hopelessness at the reservations, a new religion took hold called the Ghost Dance. It began in the Paiute tribe in Nevada and called for the rejuvenation of the earth and a return of the buffalo. Though the original movement did not advocate violence against whites, the Lakota's version, brought to them by the warriors Kicking Bear and Short Bull, varied slightly, with a prophecy that the Great Spirit would come behind a tidal wave of fresh earth, and this wave of earth would cover up the spoiled land, and it would also bury all the whites. It also said that anyone wearing a ghost shirt would be immune from bullets. Whites were afraid that there would be a violent ghost dance uprising, and the Lakota feared whites were planning on killing the ghost dancers. One group of Lakota warriors wearing ghost shirts rode past white ranches, threatening that they would be back to smash open the heads of white children and drink the blood of white women. When James McLaughlin, the Indian agent at Standing Rock, tried to force Kicking Bear to leave the agency, Sitting Bull allowed Kicking Bear to live in his own camp, to build a ghost dance circle near Sitting Bull's house, and Sitting Bull himself began wearing a ghost dance shirt. McLaughlin and Sitting Bull had clashed often in the past. things at the agency grew tense. President Benjamin Harrison sent a telegram giving McLaughlin the authority to arrest Sitting Bull. On the very early morning of December 15, 1890, McLaughlin sent Indian police officers, called metal breasts by their people because of the badges they wore. The Indian police, led by Lieutenant Bullhead and Sergeants Shavehead and Red Tomahawk, a total of 39 Indian policemen and 4 volunteers, arrived at Sitting Bull's home. They were supported by troops from the 8th Cavalry and artillery. The metal breasts woke him up and told Sitting Bull he was under arrest. The great chief dressed himself and was about to leave with Lieutenant Bullhead. Meanwhile, his followers had gathered outside at the commotion and began shouting to Sitting Bull to resist. Sitting Bull's son, Crowfoot, who has been reported as being either 14 or 17 years old, said to his dad, "You have always called yourself a brave chief. Now you are letting yourself be taken by the metal breasts?" At these words, Sitting Bull began yelling, "I am not going." Mayhem erupted. One of Sitting Bull's warriors opened fire on the police, and Lieutenant Bullhead fell fatally wounded. There was a shootout, and Sitting Bull was shot in the spine and in the head. His son, Crowfoot, was shot dead by the Indian police because he had made his father change his mind. A total of 8 Hunkpapa and 8 Indian police died. Sitting Bull's body was taken to Fort Yates, North Dakota, and originally buried there, but he was later exhumed and reburied by family members near his birthplace in South Dakota.
Well, guys, that's all for today. Please stay tuned for the book list and the credits. Watch another one of my videos. Please let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, just say hi. All right, I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.
Sticks and stones, will they chase it all? Young men's name will carry on. Kinsmen crafty